for coming, and thank you for being with us this evening at the opening of this show, Figure Landscape, Part 1. I hope all of you have had a chance to look around at the show, and hopefully, if you haven't, you will get a chance to do that after the discussion. I'm delighted to be able to welcome two distinguished speakers, two distinguished participants to this panel. On my left, from the Sotheby Institute, is Dr. András Szántó. Dr. Szántó has done many things in his career. Currently, he's at the Sotheby Institute, but prior to this, like me, he was at Columbia, running, what's it called, the
National Arts Journalism Program.
The National Arts Journalism Program at Columbia. Dr. Santos is also somebody who consults fairly widely with museums and public collections. The course that he teaches at Sotheby's is quite appropriate for our conversation today. It's a course on art as business. Is that what the title is?
It's art business.
Art business.
And then several courses.
Okay, okay. He's also an editor for the art newspaper, and has written for the New York Times, for the Los Angeles Times, and various other journals, and runs a widely read website called Art World Salon. So thank you for being with us and participating on this panel. To many of you, Dr. Hugo Weihe needs no introduction whatsoever. He has run he started up and has run the Christie's South Asian Art Department since 1998. And Hugo has been instrumental in pushing the initiatives forward, not only on the modern and contemporary side, but also on the classical side. Not as many of you perhaps know that Hugo, like Dr. Santos, also had a life, so to speak, in academia before he came to Christie's. Hugo did his PhD from the University of Zurich. And mine had nothing to do with art, but Hugo was straight down the middle. He did a PhD in art history at Zurich, and then taught at the University of Zurich for a while, and ran a very respected, perhaps the respected journal for Asian art, which the title of which I'm going to mangle. So I'm just going to let Hugo tell us what the title of it was.
It was Aussie.
Okay. And we have a quiz. You all have to tell us what that was. Anyway, so thank you very much for coming, Hugo, and let's get started. So we had the three of us had a discussion a couple of days back on. Everybody can hear us in the back. Had a bit of a preliminary discussion a couple of days back on sort of trying to figure out what the content of today's panel might be. And there were a few things we batted back and forth, and I will trot some of those things out, but hopefully we'll also leave some time at the end to answer questions that the audience might have. So in the course of our discussion, one of the things that we said that although the title of today's discussion is The Indian Art Market Looking Forward, we'd start off by doing neither of those things. You know, we won't look at the Indian art market, nor would we look forward. We'd start off by looking at or talking about the broader art market, and instead of looking forward, perhaps the place to start might be where do we stand in light of what's happened in the last couple of years as far as the world art market, as far as the world art movement, etc. goes.
Thank you. That's a short, simple question, and I'll try to answer it in a few seconds. First, I'd like to acknowledge we have, I think, 5 current and former students at the Sotheby Institute here. One of our star students works here, Naima, and there she is. It's always a pleasure to see them. They're all around you in the art world. So, this is a discussion about an emerging market, the Indian market. But I think it's important to recognize that in a certain way, the whole art market is in a state of emergence right now. That is to say, there's probably been more change in the art market and in the world of art over the last 25 years than there has been over the last 50 or 100 years to some extent. It's been so there's a lot of discussion about how the Indian market, the Chinese market, and some other emerging markets. Now there's a lot of discussion about the BRIC markets. Brazil is about to explode. And we're sort of used to talking about how these markets are developing rapidly. And it's true, and we'll talk about the details of that. I'm actually not an expert in those markets. But the backdrop against which these markets are emerging is also a context of very rapid change and flux. So it's sort of a double change dynamic that's going on here. So what are some of the key elements of that change? I mean, if you look back to the last 25 years or so, first of all, there's been a very, very broad trend of price escalation across the board. Every category of art, every category of collecting. Yes, it has relied on a couple of big booms. We had a huge boom here in the late 80s, early 90s, up to the 1984, 1990 period. And then we had another huge boom coming on top of that. But the real trend cutting across, really from the 70s, has been across the board price escalation. And along with that has come a search for new areas for people to collect, partly because the traditional stockpiles, the traditional inventories of art, Western art, European art, have been depleted. They've ended up in collections. So as the level of sophistication has grown, as curiosity has grown, we now see very active markets in not just in different regions of the world, but in areas of the arts which before hadn't been subject to very strong collecting interest. Photography being a fantastic example. So that's been a very broad tendency. Secondly, vast proliferation of the numbers of people involved in the art world across the board. New York City in the 50s had maybe 50 galleries of note. By the 1980s, maybe 200-300 galleries. Today, 800 galleries. And you can multiply that if you add cities like London, and now adding in the third great dimension of change, globalization. So that whereas the artwork really was centered in the United States in one city, New York, and in general on North America and Western Europe, we now have a dynamic art world in the former Soviet Union, Latin America, various sub-regions of Asia. So we've truly become a global market. But that's not all, and I want to stop talking very quickly. But along with this sort of vast proliferation, we've seen a kind of structural change. As the markets have become global, new types of institutions have taken a role of greater prominence that are capable of operating globally. The auction houses, the two most important ones of which I represented here in some fashion, have been able to operate globally. I don't know how many offices Christie says. Sotheby says 64 offices worldwide. Some galleries, although really only a handful of galleries, have learned to operate internationally. Most galleries remain sort of little mom and pop shops, locally defined. And of course, art fairs have taken on a new significance because as the market is dispersed and grown and globalized, it needs places for everyone to come together. And hence, the annual pilgrimages to Art Basel, to Frieze, to the Armory Show here in New York, increasingly to Dubai, Abu Dhabi Art Fairs next week, and increasingly the global calendar is defined by these international mega events. So I guess the point I want to leave you with as a kind of starting point is that this sudden emergence of a few markets that everybody's talking about, China, India in particular, or Chindia, as they like to say, is itself set against the backdrop of dynamic change, which is at the same time very invigorating, but also to some very unsettling.
Hugo, I wanted to ask you for your perspective, since you are seeing within Christie's, you're obviously seeing some of these various emerging art markets that András spoke of. Do you see sort of a different, in any ways, a different dynamic at work, let's say with the Chinese department, the Indian department, the Brazilian department, than from the Western departments, and perhaps because the story is a shorter story than, as you said, the 25 years of growth in the Western market?
Yes, if we look at emerging markets, one thing you can say, we're looking at sometimes new money. And new money, as someone put it, takes time to settle. What it means is that typically one is drawn to the arts of the time. One can relate to that more easily. It takes more time to invest and to develop connoisseurship, to study your own history and appreciate those values. We find that universally around the world, that is a phenomenon that happens. As we look at the different entities you mentioned, China is an interesting situation, is that they want to buy back into their heritage in a big way now. They've developed a certain degree of connoisseurship, but it's also a competition among collectives. Now, if you have the ability to afford to buy back something that was made for the Chinese emperor, that is by definition the best. He was the son of heaven, and you can buy that back. It's an incredible achievement, an incredible position to be in. So that is fueling, in a sense, an incredible momentum in China to get these things back. The contemporary market is different there, in the sense that it was driven by diplomats, driven by foreign collectors. One important person was the Swiss ambassador, Hugo, who was there in the 80s and 90s and was one of the first pioneers in collecting Chinese art after 1989 when things opened up. But it is still driven to a large degree from outside. But the Chinese government understood this as an opportunity to reach out and support the artists, create artist villages, support their studios, create the infrastructure for artists to flourish in the galleries and the museums on the top level, because ultimately it will reflect well on China. So that's been an interesting step. Brazil, it's difficult to put all of this under one umbrella, because BRIC is one way of looking at it economically as the opportunities, but each of these entities is very different. From an art point of view, very different possibilities. But it is an exciting moment, because there's definitely a drift or a new momentum coming out of these new economies, and which will take over. It's almost mind-boggling what's happening in China right now. And India is following suit. It's a few years behind, but it will happen the same way in India.